Let's continue the conversation that we were having in the last session. If you don't understand scarce resources and alternative uses, this is what drives everything. I don't care what country I've been in, whether I'm in Nicaragua in Central America or Honduras in Central America, or I'm in Brazil in South America, I'm in Peru in South America. It doesn't matter if I'm in Hong Kong, I'm in Taiwan. It doesn't matter if I am in Myanmar, I'm in Pakistan, I'm in India, I'm in Indonesia, I'm in Japan. It doesn't matter if I'm in Romania, I'm in England, okay? Do you follow me? It doesn't matter if I'm in Zimbabwe, I'm in South Africa, I'm in Swaziland. It doesn't matter if I'm in Nigeria or I'm in the Congo or I'm in Kenya. Do you understand what I'm talking about? It doesn't matter. I don't care what country in Africa, what country in Latin America, what country in Asia. It doesn't matter. What country in Europe. Everybody has to face this reality, and because we have not understood it, it impacts our people. It impacts our cultures. It impacts our societies. It impacts our churches, and we've not understood it. So if the pastor does not understand how this works, you are incapable of educating your people to take them to the level of understanding that God and God alone is the only one who can break through the limited resources that are available to us. But you have to understand how you're working. Let's just take this concept a little bit further by asking a question. Let's take this. How much of each resource should be allocated to each of its many uses? Just think about that. If you're going to take petroleum, okay? It gets turned into diesel, it gets turned into gasoline, it gets turned into power vehicles, okay? But it also gets turned into power boats, airplanes, aviation fuel. But that also is what that covers about 90% of the world's roadways, which is asphalt. But it is also the primary product for the thousands and hundreds of thousands. I'm not exaggerating. This is the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of products that are made out of plastic. It's petroleum based. So the more things that we invent, the more of a strain that we place upon that resource. And that resource becomes more scarce. Why? Because it has more alternative uses, and that is what drives the price of these products up. Which means that you have less resources, financial resources, to give. If you don't teach your people and train them exactly the impact that this is having on their lives, and you fail to comprehend this, nobody escapes this reality. Nobody. It's the same all over the world. It may have a different cultural expression. It may be called something different. It may have a different label. It doesn't matter what economic system you think you're working under, whether it's capitalism or socialism or communism or anything else in between that. You cannot get away from this reality that economics is the study of the use of scarce resources which have alternative uses. This happened ever since we left the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve were kicked out, I want you to understand that was a place of abundant, unlimited resources. Now you and I live in a fallen world, and the question is, how do we live and operate inside of that fallen world with access to the living God? And that was, ladies and gentlemen, is why we have a thing called the Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, Revelation to Genesis, God instructs us exactly how to circumvent this issue. So every economy has to answer that question. How much of each resource should be allocated to each of its many uses? Every economy has to answer that question. And each one does in one way or another, efficiently or inefficiently. Doing so efficiently is what economics is about. So I want you to understand this. Look, here's two words that I think we really miss in understanding this, okay? And that is this. Your economy your country is either going to be efficient or inefficient in how it handles these resources. And that is what drives the issue in your hometown, what drives the issue in your mountain village, what drives the issue in your valley village, it drives the issue in your city, in your communities along the river. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. Your nation determines, and if it's efficient, then what happens is that the ratio of resources that are available to you are much higher than those who do it inefficiently, even though they have more resources. You remember the example that I gave you earlier, that if you were to take the country of Uruguay and Venezuela and South America, they per capita they have more resources than, for example, Japan and Switzerland. But why is Japan and Switzerland so successful? Because they've learned to do something with it that Uruguay and Venezuela has never learned. They have a whole political, philosophical thought pattern that is completely radically different. That determines how these resources are going to be used, because everybody cannot get away from this reality, and that is that you have scarce resources which have alternative uses. You go, well, why do we have to know that in the church? Why do we have to understand it? Because that's the reason why your church is suffering the way it's suffering. Doing so efficiently is what economics is about. If you are efficient, you know how to manage this. If you're inefficient, this is killing you. You do the same thing in your homes, in your individual homes. You could take one family who has been very successful in managing $100 per month. They've been frugal, they've been wise, okay? They're not in debt by the grace of God. And then you take another family who has $5,000 a month and they're in the hole. You go, what's the difference? Is that one family is more efficient, the other one is inefficient. It doesn't matter that the family with the $5,000 a month has more resources. They don't know what to do with it. They're not wise in making those decisions. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I would say is the majority of the church members in churches around the world. Different kinds of economies are essentially different ways of making decisions about the allocation of scarce resources. Again, let me beat this horse to death that's already dead. The issue is scarce resources. You and I operate with scarce resources. The day you and I were born to the day we die, we're always going to operate with scarce resources. And those decisions have repercussions on the life of the whole society, and that whole society has repercussions on the life of the church. Let me see if I can paint the picture another way. During the days of the great Soviet Union, at the height of the empire, that country's industries used more electricity than American industries use. So you had Soviet Union industries, all kinds of industries, who use more electricity than American industries. Now, we're talking about electricity. Electricity costs you a lot of money. And think about this for a moment with me. So, the Soviet Union and the American, okay, and the United States of America have to both deal with scarce resources. But the Soviet Union was inefficient in how it used those resources, whereas the American industries were more efficient. And this is the impact. Even though the Soviet Union industries produced a smaller amount of output than American industries produced, This is what happened. The Soviet Union, per person, produced less than the Americans. And the Americans produced more with less. The Soviet Union produced less with more. Somebody is inefficient and the other one is efficient. This is what we see all over the world. We see this all over Latin America. We see it all over Europe. We see it all over Africa. We see it all over Asia. But it's the same thing in your individual homes and the homes of your church members. Such inefficiencies in turning inputs into outputs translated into a lower standard of living in a country richly endowed than any other country in the world. Russia, let me tell you something, for example, is one of the few industrial nations that produces more oil than it consumes. Russia literally produces more oil, which is why Russia is capable of flooding the market than it actually consumes. But an abundance of resources does not automatically create an abundance of goods. So even though they have an abundance, they were unable to capitalize on this, on the pricing of it, which impacts the entire nation and the standard of living. But if you have efficiency in production, you go, but Brother Eddie, why are we talking about this? Because you have failed to understand that God has put you and I in this world. We're not, let me tell you something. When you and I were born again, He left us here. This is where He left us. We're still here. And we have to work with the resources that we have here. And you need to understand how this works. I don't depend, in other words, I don't put all my eggs in one basket. I'm not doing that. Because once that basket, the bottom falls out for everything. Efficiency in production, the rate at which inputs are turned into output, is not just some technicality that economics talks about. It's not just that. It affects the standard of living of whole societies. When visualizing this process, it helps to think about the real things. The iron ore, the petroleum, the wood, the furniture, the food, the automobiles, all of the other inputs that go into the production process. And you have the furniture, the food, the cars, the vehicles, the automobiles that come out the other end. Rather than think of economic decision as being simply decisions about money. I think this is the problem. Everybody, when you hear the word economics or economy, they immediately think about money. Money is not your problem. I mean, the actual printing of it. That's not your problem. Money is only a representation of the value of your products, of your goods and services. If you think that economics is just about getting money, spending money, okay, then you will never understand your problem. Because if you talk to the average pastor all over the world, all he's talking about is, I need more money coming to the church. He hasn't understood anything. He doesn't even understand his own country. He doesn't even understand his own culture. He doesn't understand his own society. He has no comprehension of how this is impacting, because you see, and then if you ask him, have you read everything from Genesis to Malachi, everything from Matthew to Revelation? He says no. See, he doesn't know how to grasp the subject to teach his people that all the resources that he needs, God has put right in front of him. His problem is he doesn't know how to draw it out. Although the word economics suggests money to some people, because it does to some people, for a society as a whole, money is just an artificial device to get real things done. Money is just an artificial device. You've made it a real device. It's an artificial device. Otherwise, the government can make us all rich by simply printing more money. That's the easiest thing to do. Just get a printing press. It is not money, but the volume. It's the volume of the goods and the services which determines whether a country is poverty-stricken or it's prosperous. Now, let's talk about the role of economics, right? Just briefly. Among the misconceptions of economics is that it is something that tells you how to make money. You say economics and people, their ears perk up. How do I make more money? Or run a business or predict the ups and downs of the stock market. That's not economics. But economics is not personal finance or business administration. It's not that either. And predicting the ups and the downs of the stock market has yet to be reduced to a dependable formula. Nobody's figured that out yet. When economics analyzes prices, when it analyzes wages, when it analyzes profits, or the international balance of trade, for example, it is from the standpoint of how decisions in various parts of the economy affect the allocation of scarce resources in a way that raises or lowers the material standard of living of the people as a whole. Let me give you a, let me see if I can paint a picture for you here, okay? Let's see, how many minutes we got left here? Okay, let me see if I can paint the picture real fast for you here. I was in South Africa, in the country of South Africa, and they were having riots, okay? And they were having riots because they had these people that were coming in from other countries, Nigeria. There was just a massive migration coming in from Nigeria, a massive migration coming in from Zimbabwe, Malawi, okay, Mozambique. And so let me see if I can paint this picture in the few minutes that we have here so you have a better idea of what I'm talking about. Because I just made a long statement and you looked at me and you said, what? What did you just say? So let me say it again and then I'll give you the short explanation. When economics analyzes prices, when economics analyzes wages, when economics analyzes profits or the international balance of trade, for example, it is from the standpoint, and this is the key. Listen to this. This is the key to understanding the following thing I'm going to say to you. Is it analyzes it from the standpoint of how decisions in various parts of the economy affect the allocation and of scarce resources in a way that raises or lowers, it's either going to raise it or lower the material standard of living of people as a whole. I mentioned to you that when I was in South Africa, so we got all these people coming in from Nigeria, we have all these people coming in from Malawi, Mozambique, okay, and Zimbabwe, and migrants are coming in. They're flooding the market in South Africa. And so this is what happens. For example, we saw this when we were in Peru. When we were in Peru, in South America, you had all of these immigrants that were coming in from Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela. They're coming in, they're flooding the market, they're flooding the workplace. Right? We're seeing this all over the world. We see this here in the United States, which is the reason why people don't understand the issues. They always raise the issue as a base of racism or discrimination. But here's what happened. And I see it because I have the opportunity to travel extensively around the world, so I get a chance to see this problem unfold right before my very eyes. And then I'm always talking to people, trying to figure out what they're saying to me and how this is impacting them and so forth. So when I was in Peru and I was in South Africa, for example, and you have all these immigrants that are coming in. Let me give you an example of this. And we saw this in Swaziland also, right, which is a smaller country, but we saw the same thing. Right? And so let me show you this. Just think about it this way. So there were these riots taking place in South Africa where the South African native, and there were in the thousands in the streets, they were rioting in the streets. And they began to physically attack the Nigerians and the Mozambiques and the Zimbabweans and the Malawians, okay, as these different ethnic groups. And now you got this ethnic war taking place. Okay? You see this taking place there. We see this in Central America. Okay? We see this in Mexico, where all of a sudden Central Americans come into Central America and into Mexico, and they're willing to work. Listen to this, and I'm going to paint it in a picture in a very simple way for you to understand. Okay. So let's say that the average worker makes, makes $10 a day. I know that's an arbitrary number, okay? But let me just put it in terms for you, okay? So let's say that you make $10 a day, the average worker who lives here. I don't know what it is, but let's just say it's $10 a day. The native worker, okay? So the way they were explaining to me in Peru, and when I was in Mexico, and when I was in South Africa, they were explaining to me. When I was in Kenya, we saw this also, as we had the people from other countries flooding into the market, okay? And so you got these migrant workers coming in. So let's say you're making $10 a day, you're on the job. So the migrant worker would come up to the boss, would come up to the shop, to the store owner, to the factory, so forth, and he says, I'll tell you what, I'll work for you for $5 a day. Let me ask you a question. Economics is about how decisions are made and how those decisions, okay, how those decisions either raise or lower the material standard of living for your people. So when we were in Peru, for example, and they said, okay, we make $8 a day here working. When the Colombian comes into our country, the Bolivian comes into our country, the Ecuadorian comes into our country, he's willing to work for $4 a day. So all of a sudden we lose our jobs because these guys are willing to work for half the amount. Now, what just happened? What just happened? The standard of living just dropped dramatically. It dropped dramatically for the man who's a native of that country. He's unemployed. Unemployment among the national residents of that country now begins to rise, and the employment level of the immigrant continues to rise. Do you see that? And now what happens is that now the resources have been shifted by a decision, a political decision, a cultural decision that has an impact on the economics of your nation, of your people. We're seeing this problem all over the world. In my city, where I live, in Los Angeles, California, in the western part of the United States, in the state of California, we're bracing ourselves because decisions have been made that we're going to receive 1 million people more into our city. Now, that's a political decision, to receive 1 million people more. Here's the problem. What's going to happen to our traffic? We're already standing in the freeways. What's going to happen to gas prices? More people competing for a scarce resource that has alternative uses, which means it drives the price up. What's going to happen just to our sewage and drainage problem? You have 1 million more people flushing toilets, taking baths, taking showers, using water. You got 1 million more people jumping into garbage. Now we've literally exponentially grown our garbage collection. Where does that go? 1 million more people in the grocery stores competing for the same product. If you don't understand this concept of scarce resources which have alternative uses, okay, then you've misunderstood everything. But the way to avoid having this conversation at any level of intelligence, at any level of integrity, honesty, is to always call it a race issue. And we saw the riots take place in South Africa. We saw the riots take place in Peru, in South America. We're seeing the riots take place in Central America. We're seeing the same problems in Europe. And we have that problem here in the United States of America. If you don't understand biblical economics, you don't understand economics, period, then you understand nothing. And this impacts our people because our people live in the society. They live in these cities. They live in these states. They live in these countries. They live exactly where all of this is taking place. And decisions are being made. And this ultimately impacts our churches. It impacts our giving. It impacts what we receive. So you have to understand that economics is not simply a topic on which to express opinions or to vent emotions. No, it is a systematic study of cause and effect. And I don't know why we don't seem to comprehend this issue. You and I are always going to have to deal with cause and effect. Cause and effect operates every single day in every aspect of our lives. So it is a systematic study of cause and effect, showing what happens when you do specific things in specific ways. In economic analysis, for example, the methods used by the Marxist economists, like Oscar Lange, for example. You don't know that name, you never heard of that name, you probably don't care. Everybody hear about that name again? Okay? Now, I want you to understand something. He did not differ in any fundamental way from the methods used by the conservative economist Milton Friedman. Now, these two men are they're at the extreme end. You got Oscar Lange over here. You have Milton Friedman over here from the most liberal economic element to the most conservative element, and both use this almost exact same system of analysis. It is these basic economic principles that this teaching is about. You take, for example, Oscar Lange. Oscar Rizar Lange, okay? He was born in July 27th of 1904. He passed away on October 2nd, 1965. He was a Polish economist and a diplomat. He is best known for advocating the use of market pricing tools and socialist systems and providing a model of market socialism. There's a combination. That's kind of difficult, but it's a contradiction in terms. And during his stay in the United States, while he was here in the United States, Lange was a sought-after academic teacher and researcher in mathematical economics. But later in communist Poland, he was a member of the Central Committee of the Polish United Workers' Party and a believer in centrally managed economy. So then he went from a free capitalist system to communism. How did he do that? These are the extremes of people that influence our economic systems all over the world. Now, one of the ways of understanding the consequences of economic decisions is to look at them in terms of the incentives that they create, rather than simply the goals that they pursue. You see, incentives creates an environment, not just the goals that you want to pursue. And this is exactly what our societies and our governments do. But many times the decisions that they make, they have not really thought through the incentives that they create. This means that the consequences matter more than the intentions, and not just the immediate consequences, but also the longer run repercussions. So if you're going to have people move in mass from one country to another country, and when they move in, they're going not only they're going to move in with their cultural pattern, their linguistic pattern, but they're going to move in and have a tremendous impact on the resources that are already scarce and limited, okay? And now it's going to become alternative uses, and you're going to have people coming in who are willing to work for a cheaper price, and all of a sudden, the native that was born and raised there finds himself without a job. That's the reality of what's happening all over the world. And this impacts our churches. And you need to comprehend that. So if you're not grasping the idea of cause and effect, every decision that we make has a cause and effect. Whether there's intentional consequences or unintentional consequences, it doesn't matter. Once you have opened the door, now that door is very difficult to close again.